The next 72 hours are not ordinary. They are spiritually loaded. What happens on these days will open doors or shut them forever. Many will ignore the signs and regret it later. But you were led here for a reason, because an ex-witch is about to expose what the dark side prepares during critical spiritual windows like this. And once you hear it, you will never see these days the same way again. There are certain days that carry unusual spiritual weight, not because of the calendar, but because of the alignment of human choices, emotions, and unseen battles. These are the days the Dark Kingdom studies in advance. They do not act randomly. They wait, they observe, and then they strike. February 11, 12, and 13 are not just dates. They are pressure points. Moments where decisions are magnified, where small compromises open large doors, where a single wrong step can echo for months, even years. When I was inside the occult world, we didn't fear churches. We didn't fear religious routines. We feared timing, because timing is everything in the spirit. There were specific days when rituals were intensified, not because of superstition, but because those days carried emotional energy, financial stress, relationship tension, loneliness, anxiety about the future. The dark side feeds on emotional openings, and those 3 days are full of them. People feel pressure in the middle of the month. Bills are due, plans are failing, arguments increase, doubt grows louder, and that is exactly when the dark side moves. They don't need you to perform rituals. They just need you to make one wrong decision, one bitter reaction, one moment of surrender to fear, because spiritual doors don't always open through ceremonies. Sometimes they open through emotions. I remember a woman who lost her job around this exact time of the month. She was overwhelmed, afraid, angry at God. She spoke words of defeat over her life. She said, "Nothing ever works for me. I give up." Those words were not just emotional. They were spiritual permissions. Within weeks, her relationships collapsed, her health declined, and she found herself trapped in a cycle she couldn't escape. What she didn't know was that her lowest emotional moment became the entry point, because the dark side studies patterns. They watch when people are weakest, and they focus their attacks during those windows. That is why these days are critical. Not because something magical is written on the calendar, but because these are the days when many people are spiritually careless. They argue more, they complain more, they isolate themselves, they ignore prayer, they feed negative thoughts. And every one of those actions creates a crack in their spiritual defense. The enemy doesn't need a wide open door. A small crack is enough. Think about your own life. How many times have your worst decisions come during moments of pressure? Moments when you were tired, hurt, or afraid. That is not coincidence. That is strategy. The Dark Kingdom does not waste energy. They invest it where it will produce results. And these 3 days are often filled with emotional turbulence, which makes them perfect for spiritual interference. During my time in the occult, I heard leaders say something chilling. They would say, "Watch the middle of the month. That is when many fall. Not because of spells, not because of curses, but because of choices. People give up on their prayers. They compromise their values. They step into places they promised God they would never return to. And once they do, the door opens. That is why you must treat these days differently. Not with fear, but with awareness. You must guard your words, guard your emotions, guard your decisions. Because the spirit realm is not neutral. Every thought, every word, every action carries weight. And in critical windows like this, The weight is multiplied. What you speak now will echo later. What you choose now will shape the next season of your life. These are days of testing, days of exposure, days where the hidden battles become visible. But here is the truth the dark side doesn't want you to know. These critical days are not only dangerous, they are also powerful, because the same spiritual intensity they use for attacks can be used by you for breakthroughs. If you stay disciplined, if you stay prayerful, if you stay spiritually alert, then what was meant to destroy you will become the very thing that elevates you. The dark side counts on your ignorance. They depend on your distraction. They rely on your emotional reactions. But when you become aware, their advantage disappears. That is why you were brought here, not by accident, not by chance, but because these days are a turning point. And what you do next will decide what follows. Critical days are not chaotic by accident. They are engineered environments. When I was inside the occult system, nothing was left to chance. Strategies were built around predictable human behavior, not superstition, not fantasy, patterns. And these 3 days, February 11, 12, and 13, often align with emotional fatigue. Momentum from the beginning of the month begins to weaken. Goals start to feel heavy. Motivation drops. Frustration rises. That emotional dip is not harmless. It is targeted. The first trap set during these days is isolation. You begin to withdraw. You stop responding to messages. You avoid spiritual conversations. You convince yourself that you just need space. But isolation is not rest. It is exposure. When a person disconnects spiritually and emotionally, their discernment weakens. Their thoughts grow louder. Negative ideas begin to sound reasonable. In occult meetings, we were taught something chilling. Separate them from their covering. Not physically, mentally. Make them feel misunderstood. Make them feel unsupported. Make them feel alone. Because once a person isolates, they become easier to influence. Have you noticed that during heavy days, you question everything? Your purpose, your relationships, your faith, your future. That is not random. The second trap is offense. Small disagreements suddenly feel massive. Words feel sharper. Patience feels thinner. A message is misread. A tone is misunderstood. A delay becomes rejection. And suddenly, you are wounded. Offense is one of the most powerful spiritual entry points. Not because it feels dramatic, but because it feels justified. You tell yourself, I have a right to feel this way. And maybe emotionally you do. But spiritually, offense creates openings. When you replay hurt in your mind, you rehearse bitterness. When you rehearse bitterness, you build strongholds. I saw families collapse during these cycles, not because of witchcraft rituals, but because no one guarded their heart. One argument during a critical window can create months of distance. The third trap is impulsive decisions. Critical days amplify urgency. You feel like you must decide now. You must respond now. You must quit now. You must confront now. That pressure is dangerous because not every urgency is divine. Some urgency is engineered. In the occult system, there was a concept, push them to move before they pray. If someone makes a decision from emotion instead of clarity, the consequences multiply. Quitting a job in frustration, ending a relationship in anger, making a financial risk out of panic. One impulsive move during these days can shift an entire season. And here is what makes it more serious. When a person makes a destructive decision during a spiritually intense window, the aftermath feels heavier. Not because God punishes, but because alignment matters. Decisions made in confusion often create long-term instability. The fourth trap is spiritual silence. You stop praying with intensity. You scroll instead of seeking. You distract instead of confronting the tension. And the longer you stay spiritually passive, the stronger the pressure feels. The dark side does not always need dramatic manifestations. They prefer quiet erosion, small compromises, small delays, small disconnections. And during critical days, erosion accelerates. You must understand something clearly. These traps are subtle. They feel normal. They feel human. That is why they work. If the attack looked obvious, you would resist. If it felt dramatic, you would pray harder. But when it feels ordinary, you relax. That relaxation is the opening. I remember watching someone who had been spiritually disciplined for years, strong in prayer, focused, stable. Then during a critical emotional week, he decided to skip prayer just for a few days. He said he was tired, overwhelmed, busy. Within weeks, his clarity faded, his confidence dropped, his focus shattered. Nothing dramatic happened at first, just subtle weakening. That is how it begins. Critical days are not about fear. They are about awareness. The traps are predictable. Isolation, offense, impulsiveness, spiritual silence. If you avoid these four, you neutralize most attacks. But if you fall into even one, the pressure increases. And here is the deeper revelation. The enemy studies reaction, not perfection. You do not need to be flawless. You need to be alert. During these days, slow down your responses. Pause before speaking. Delay emotional decisions. Increase prayer, not decrease it. When you do the opposite of what the pressure demands, you break the cycle. Pressure says react. You choose restraint. Pressure says isolate. You choose connection. Pressure says quit. You choose endurance. And when you resist the pattern, something powerful happens. The strategy collapses because the dark side depends on predictability. When you refuse to respond as expected, their plan weakens. These days are critical, not because destruction is guaranteed, but because decisions are magnified, and you are standing at a crossroads. Awareness or reaction, discipline or impulse, prayer or passivity. Choose carefully. Because what you do during these 3 days will echo far beyond them. There are moments in life when one decision outweighs 100 others. Moments where a single choice becomes a spiritual turning point. These critical days carry that kind of weight, not because of superstition, but because pressure reveals what truly lives inside you. When pressure rises, masks fall, excuses fade, and the real condition of your spirit is exposed. That is why these days feel heavier, because they are days of exposure inside the occult world. We were taught to watch how people respond during intense emotional windows. Not what they say in calm seasons, not what they promise in comfortable moments, but what they choose when everything feels uncertain. Because decisions made under pressure reveal alignment. There were people who lived disciplined lives for months. Strong routines, strong faith, strong focus. But during one critical window, they made a decision driven by fear. And that one decision shifted everything. I remember a man who had been praying for restoration in his marriage. He was patient. He was consistent. He was rebuilding trust. But during a stressful 3-day period, he felt rejected, ignored, misunderstood. And in a moment of emotional weakness, he reached out to someone from his past. Someone he knew would listen. Someone who made him feel validated. It felt harmless at first. Just a conversation. Just emotional comfort. But that moment reopened an old door. Within weeks, the progress in his marriage collapsed. Arguments returned. Trust shattered. Distance grew. One decision. During a critical emotional window, That is how spiritual doors work. They don't always open with rituals. Sometimes they open with reactions. A reaction to pain, a reaction to rejection, a reaction to fear. And the dark side studies these reactions. They don't force doors open. They wait for you to open them yourself. During critical days like these, three types of decisions carry the most spiritual weight. The first is the decision to compromise. Pressure whispers, just this once, just a small step. No one will know. And the compromise feels tiny, almost harmless. But spiritually, compromise is not measured by size. It is measured by direction. A small step in the wrong direction still leads to the wrong destination. The second decision is the decision to give up. Critical days are designed to exhaust your patience. You feel like nothing is changing, like your prayers are hitting the ceiling, like your efforts are invisible, and a voice inside says, "Why keep trying?" That voice is dangerous because giving up during a spiritual battle does not create peace. It creates vulnerability. When a person stops resisting, the pressure increases, not decreases. I saw this many times. People would stop praying, stop believing, stop standing, and within weeks, their situation would worsen. Not because God abandoned them, but because they abandoned their position. The third decision is the decision to react instead of respond. Reaction is emotional, instant, unfiltered. Response is intentional, prayerful, grounded. During critical days, the pressure tries to force reactions, angry words, impulsive actions, harsh decisions. And once the reaction is released, the consequences follow. There was a woman who received a message from her employer during a stressful period. It was short, cold, unclear. She assumed the worst, felt disrespected, and in anger, she sent a long, emotional reply. She quit before she was even fired. Later, she discovered the message had been misunderstood. The employer was actually planning to promote her. One reaction during a critical window, and the opportunity disappeared. Critical days magnify consequences. That is why they feel so intense. But here is the revelation the dark side fears most. These same days can seal doors against them forever. Because decisions don't only open doors, they close them too. When you choose forgiveness instead of offense, a door closes. When you choose prayer instead of silence, a door closes. When you choose discipline instead of compromise, a door closes. Every right decision becomes a spiritual lock. And the more locks you install, the harder it becomes for darkness to enter. I once saw someone who faced intense pressure during a critical period. Financial stress, relationship tension, health issues. Everything was hitting at once. But instead of reacting, he did something different. He increased his prayer. He fasted. He spoke words of faith even when he felt fear. Within weeks, opportunities opened. Unexpected favor appeared. Doors that had been closed for years suddenly moved. Nothing changed around him at first, but something changed inside him. And that internal shift sealed doors the enemy had been trying to open. That is the power of decisions during critical days. They are not ordinary choices. They are spiritual statements. Every decision you make during these days sends a message into the unseen realm. Your actions declare one of two things. Either I am vulnerable or I am guarded. Either I surrender to pressure or I stand in authority, and the realm of darkness responds accordingly. That is why these days are described as having no second chances. Not because grace disappears, but because some decisions create consequences that cannot be easily reversed. Words cannot always be unsaid. Trust cannot always be instantly restored. Opportunities cannot always be reopened. So the safest path is awareness. Slow down your decisions. Pray before responding. Guard your emotions. And refuse to let pressure control your actions. Because during these critical days, your decisions are not just choices. They are spiritual doorways. Critical days are not only dangerous, they are also loaded with spiritual opportunity. The same intensity the dark side uses to create pressure can be used by you to create breakthrough. Because in the spirit realm, intensity multiplies results. That means every prayer carries more weight. Every right decision carries more power. Every act of discipline creates deeper impact. These days are not meant to destroy you. They are meant to reveal you. They reveal your focus. They reveal your discipline. They reveal your spiritual authority. And when you respond correctly, what was meant as a trap becomes a turning point. The first key to breakthrough during critical days is spiritual alertness. You must refuse to move on autopilot. You must become intentional with your thoughts, words, and actions. Wake up with awareness. Speak life, not fear. Guard your conversations, because careless words during critical windows carry heavier consequences. If fear tries to rise, answer it with faith. If anger tries to grow, answer it with restraint. If doubt whispers, answer it with prayer. Alertness shuts down spiritual traps before they even form. The second key is controlled emotions. Critical days will test your reactions. People may say things that irritate you. Situations may not go as planned. Unexpected stress may appear. But your power is not in controlling events. Your power is in controlling your response. The dark side expects emotional reactions. They depend on it. But when you stay calm, patient, and disciplined, their strategy weakens. There is spiritual authority in self-control, not loud reactions, not dramatic confrontations. Quiet strength is more powerful than emotional explosions. During these days, choose silence over argument. Choose patience over impulse. Choose prayer over panic, because every controlled emotion is a closed door to darkness. The third key is intentional prayer and spiritual focus. Do not reduce your spiritual habits during these days. Increase them. If you normally pray once, pray twice. If you normally read a few verses, read more. If you normally speak positive words, speak them louder and more often. Pressure is not a sign to step back spiritually. It is a sign to step forward. When the dark side increases activity, your response should be stronger alignment. Prayer during critical days acts like a shield. It creates spiritual resistance. It disrupts negative plans before they manifest. There were times in the occult system when rituals failed. Not because they were weak, but because the target was spiritually covered. Leaders would say, "Someone is praying for them. Leave it." That is the power of spiritual focus. It creates protection you cannot see, but the dark side can. The fourth key is decisive obedience. Critical days are moments where small acts of obedience carry huge consequences. A phone call you feel led to make. An apology you feel prompted to offer. A habit you feel instructed to stop. These nudges are not random. They are spiritual instructions, and when you obey quickly, doors begin to shift. I once saw someone receive a simple instruction during a stressful period. He felt led to forgive someone he had been angry with for years. It didn't make emotional sense, but he obeyed. Within days, financial opportunities appeared. Connections were restored. Peace returned to his home. One act of obedience during a critical window And the entire direction of his life shifted, because obedience during intense seasons carries multiplied results. Now understand this clearly. Breakthrough is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is quiet, a decision you didn't make, an argument you avoided, a temptation you resisted. Those quiet victories are powerful. They seal doors. They build strength. They create spiritual momentum. And by the end of these 3 days, you may not see fireworks, but you will have something more valuable: stability, clarity, protection, alignment. And those 4 things create long-term breakthrough. Because real victory is not a single moment, it is a direction. Critical days are spiritual intersections. They are moments where paths change. One path leads to confusion, regret, and setbacks. The other leads to strength, growth, and favor. And the difference between those 2 paths is not luck, it is decision. If you stay alert, disciplined, prayerful, and obedient, these days will not destroy you, they will elevate you. Because what was designed as a test will become your testimony. These days are not your downfall, they are your proving ground. What the dark side prepared as a trap will become your platform for victory. Stand firm. Speak life. Refuse every emotional snare. Your authority is stronger than their strategy. And when these days end, you will not be weaker. You will be unstoppable because you chose discipline over pressure. And that decision just changed your future.